Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Literacy View. We have a very special guest with us today. We're going to be talking about boys and books. All right. And we have someone who made it her mission to really try to boost reading for boys. And she is the founder of Literacy for Boys. Her name is Tanya Grambauer, and she is a star in Australia. We met Tanya at the World Literacy Summit and attended her presentation. And we were just wowed by it. And we're so excited to have Tanya with us today. Tanya, this is an important topic. It is a worldwide problem that boys seem to lag behind girls. And it's not isolated to one place. It seems to be an issue in trying to get boys interested in reading and to boost their literacy skills. So tell us a little bit about how you got into this. I know that you were a teacher and a tutor before you started Literacy for Boys. So what was the reason you decided to take this on?
Thank you, ladies. Well, this is very topical for us here in Australia, and I will share some statistics in a moment. But I found that when I started my own tutoring business in Sydney, I needed 12 months break from the classroom, and it was amazing that even in working in all boys schools and working in mixed sex schools, it became apparent to me when I started a literacy coaching or tutoring business, because when you have students coming to you, you meet with the parents and you talk about what their needs are. And I just could not believe that boys were coming to me for literacy. It planted a seed back then, 15 years ago. Girls were coming to me for a mixture of maths, English, maybe some scholarship coaching, work with their history assignments. But it was unbelievable that boys were all coming to me for literacy of all ages, whether they needed help from those early reading years right up to coaching the boys in year 9 and year 10. So it really took me to start up a tutoring business to see that alignment was really out of whack with girls and boys. So that's what was that initial seed that I just couldn't believe. It was so obvious that boys were coming to me for literacy, whereas girls were for a range of reasons.
So that's interesting because I've tutored for years. I've had many girls along the way with problems with their reading, whether it's, being able to lift the words up off the page or comprehension. I did find there were plenty of girls, but I do think that as far as boys picking up a book on their own, I think there were more girls that were more open to wanting to explore reading. So, I think this is an important topic. Judy.
Can I say something too?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you something, but go ahead.
So this is interesting. I actually, I still work in the New York City public schools, but I also do private practice. And I would say that probably 75 to 80% of my clientele, I don't know if it's because I'm a boy mom. I don't know if it's because boys have more difficulty with reading. A lot of my clients are boy clients. I love working with boys. I'm passionate about it because I feel like boys are so misunderstood in the classroom very often and neglected, and not enough attention is given to their needs. I have worked with many, many girl clients as well, but I would say if I had to give a percentage, I don't know why, Faith, 75% of my clientele is boys.
Yeah, I would not say over the years mine was as extreme as that. definitely not. Probably more boys than girls, but not such a drastic difference. What I did notice, what I picked up on, believe it or not, were that many kids I had were left-handed. And the reason I noticed that was because I'm left-handed, and so is Judy. And, I did always
Tanya, are
find,
you left-handed?
No, I'm the outlier here.
Yes, isn't that a switch, right? And that was something that caught my eye, that over the years, when you think about, the number of students I've had and think about how many lefties there were struggling, girl or boy, I found that to be interesting. But let's stick to the topic now of boys. That's where we are. I don't want to go off.
You never know. Somebody might end up doing a research study on literacy and
left-handedness.
We might inspire somebody.
If you're out there, I would love to know if there's a connection or it just happened to be a coincidence. I don't know. But I thought that was very interesting.
It would be worth exploring. I mean, any connections that we can find, will really make us better informed as educators. And I guess I'm also a boy mum, Judy, and I have a daughter as well. But I think when you do have that connection, you see that you do need to work harder when they're younger to form that connection with books. Boys are busy. They definitely are. And maybe that's why numbers come to them a little bit more easily, because solving a maths problem is obviously less intensive on their, the mechanics of reading for a boy is going to take them a little bit longer. But I just really, the link between confidence and reading, like I just see that we have to equip our boys with good literacy skills in order for them to feel confident in the classroom. Boys don't like to see themselves as a failure in front of their peers. So I think that's very important for us to, it's more than just reading. This is actually really their inner confidence as well.
You mentioned before something, Tanya, about like a single-sex school, all-boys school, as well as a mixed school. So, is there something to it by keeping boys together, separate from girls? Do you think that that's a good idea to encourage boys to read? What did you see since you had that experience working in both environments with just an all-boys school and then mixed? Are girls a distraction? I'm assuming yes, as they get older, but what about at the primary level? I'm interested in that. I think that's something that, might have some merit to it.
My teaching style was definitely different between the two types of schooling. Definitely. Boys do learn differently. I know that. And there's a lot of research that would suggest that. And when I wanted to create a program, I knew that boys just need smaller passages of text, and you have to hook them. You absolutely do. So boys, you need to work hard, a little bit harder to keep their interest. They perhaps don't work for longer periods of time. I do like the circle back to explicit teaching, which I think works really well for how boys learn, a bit more focused step by step, but not, sitting half an hour or an hour expecting them to be still and focused. It definitely changed my teaching, and it was wonderful to actually step out of mixed sex classrooms and into all boys environments. They're definitely busier. I think the competition was different, I think, between teaching an all boys classroom. They didn't have to try and, be silly in front of the girls, or the girls wouldn't sort of, for them as well. There's just different learning styles. There is merit for that. It would be interesting to follow at any schools that perhaps segregate the boys and girls, but then I don't know whether that's, a reflection of what, that's a real solution for schools either. But I did definitely learn a lot as an educator.
Yeah, so Judy and I always have this conversation about learning styles. And so there's no research to support learning styles. I mean, that's been debunked. But I think what I'm hearing you say, I don't want to play a game of semantics, but I do want to be clear to the audience. I think what I'm hearing you say is possibly that boys need to move more frequently, and our traditional schools are not really designed with the boy in mind, especially since there are female teachers and the expectations of sitting for long periods of time will not really jive. I think that's what I'm hearing you say, because the learning styles thing is not something I want to leave our listeners with right now. Before you jump in, Tanya, I want to bring Judy into the conversation. So, there are certain things, Judy, that I know that you and I have discussed about, how do we boost scores for our children in low-income areas, diverse students. And now we're talking about boys is, like a different category. Do you see similarities between our conversations we've had with what do we do about children in low-income areas? What do we do about children, with parents that maybe have not gone to college or furthered their education? What do we do about children who have been diagnosed with dyslexia? Now we're talking about boys. I'm seeing a strand going through all of this. I'm curious what your thoughts are, Judy.
Well, I have a lot of thoughts on this. I've been in education now. This is my 29th year. I've taught in wealthy districts, poor districts. Right now, I'm working in one of the poorest districts. But overall, everywhere I've been, I see that boys need more confidence, they need more love, and they need more support. And I think they also need more acceptance in the classrooms. A lot of teachers sometimes have these rigid demands on our kids. Sit still, sit straight, fold your hands, don't talk. Where is the research to say that that's not allowed? Now, we all are moving towards the direction of more explicit and structured literacy. That doesn't mean there's no time for discussion. That doesn't mean that there's no time to give supportive feedback and care and love and show that we believe in our kids. It's hard. I work with a lot of kids that have really tough lives. And I think that it's really important to listen to our kids and know what might be happening at home might not be that fun or might not be that easy. I have kids who have lost parents. I have students that hear gunshots. Sometimes I hear gunshots at work. I live in a wealthy town. I go to work in an area that's poor. But the one thing that I do believe is that if we give kids explicit and structured literacy, we can have great outcomes regardless of socioeconomic status, regardless of if kids are poor, wealthy, because we're moving outcomes. New York City, kudos to you guys. We're finally seeing results. And in my school, we're seeing higher data this year because of explicit and structured literacy and paying attention to what matters.
So I'm just going to jump in. So Tanya, what Judy just said was exactly what I was thinking, that all of these discussions really are about how do we boost everyone up? And it's all the same. If you think about it, all those good strategies really will boost everyone up. Doesn't matter if we're being explicit, if we're using structured work. What are some things that you've done in your work with Literacy for Boys that you think really has made a difference for them? And I'm curious to think about, would this be something that's probably just good practice for everyone, but we just don't see it enough? What are some of your thoughts about that?
So what I saw a correlation with when I was working with small groups of boys, I tapped into their interests. So if these boys really loved football, camping, dogs, once I created comprehension or reading tasks around their interests, I had them hooked. And it was as simple as that. That was my initial light bulb moment. And I just found that they just wanted more. So these were boys that would turn away from text. Their parents had approached me because they were sitting on a C, and the only way down is further failure. So we needed some intervention. Now, this was not any reading diagnosis or difficulties. So that's a separate issue, even though I do work with boys that fall into that category. I'm talking about your mainstream boys that are disconnected from text. They are the illiterate. So they actually have the reading skills, but they don't read. And so from those little methods of engagement and tapping into their interest, that was where my program Literacy for Boys was born from. And I thought, I need to take this recipe online to reach a broader audience. So what I also found is actually the girls loved our program. They want to read about roller coasters. They want to read about, the axolotl, which is just, a weird and wonderful animal that you can have as a pet. So if you bring in science, not every boy loves sport, so that's important. And I have two sons who are different, so that was great in my governance of when I created this. One's really sports mad, one really enjoys more sort of science topics. Lego, all of that. There's so many wonderful things that will draw our kids in. And if you give them something where they bring a bit of prior knowledge. For example, let's compare the Xbox with the PlayStation. Bang, you've already got, even most of your girls, you've already got them into, okay, I know a bit about both of those. If you put that in a comparative article, and then from there, you've actually got a reading passage, questions, and then you've got a discussion point, which is what Judy said before. Boys like to actually discuss their ideas. Getting it on paper is the next step, which is most educators will know that boys will talk you through their ideas if they're a chatter, but trying to get them to write it down on paper is really a barrier. But I'd have to say that was my formula, which I just find teachers that we're so exhausted. They are so exhausted. They are burnt out. So it's trying to give them tools that will just save them on that time of finding material. So I think, to your point, Faith, getting boys engaged, you have to get those topics that will pique their interest, and then you'll see them literally draw in, and then that discussion, and then we found that's been a really good model.
So it's interesting. You mentioned something very important, Tanya. You used the word illiterate, right? A lot of times we talk about illiterate, right? Illiteracy, that they can't read. You're talking about kids who disengage, who choose not to read, but can read, to be illiterate without, right? So there's our morphology lesson for today, right? With different prefixes. So let's talk a little bit about that. I think that is very important. We don't talk enough about people who choose not to read. And, they rather get their information in any way but reading, that they just don't feel comfortable with it. So what you're saying is we have to go with their interests. There was something that I found that Judy's like dying to jump in.
I'm dying. I'm trying to say something controversial. I can't take it.
But just let me just say, I looked up an article, a Reading Rockets article, and one thing that they said, along with what you were saying, the short bursts of intense work instead of, long periods of time, they mentioned humor and how, I mean, I'm sure girls love humor too, but, sometimes boys like, bathroom humor, potty mouth type humor, and that can engage them, like the Captain Underpants types of books too. Nothing wrong with that, really, because it's fun, but they need obviously other things. So, Judy, I know you're bursting. What do you want to say, hon?
There's so many things that I want to say. I think that our publishers have to start thinking about what kids are interested in more and communicating with kids. I was just at the Big Sky Literacy Summit in Montana, and I was talking to my friends at Tumbleweed, Christina Rodriguez and Susan Gibson, and they said I asked them, we went out for dinner, we're hanging out, we're having a couple of drinks, and I'm like, how do you guys decide what topics you're going to write about? And sometimes they write about things that are in their personal lives, but sometimes they'll actually ask kids. And they actually gave me an assignment. They said, can you go back to school this year and ask what kids want to hear about? And I think it's important to think about that in terms of different communities, because what my students at my school might be interested in might be a little bit different than what kids far away might be in. So I think giving kids a voice. But here's the controversial piece. So my former training was in balanced literacy and reading recovery. And I felt that there was a lot more choice in a lot of classrooms that I was seeing back then. And even when I would go to, yes, I'm going to say it, even though I'm very deeply immersed in the structured literacy world, I went to a conference called LitCon. It was in Providence, Rhode Island, back in 2013 or 2014. And many of the topics were student interest, incorporating stickers that are interesting to get kids to write. And you know what, quite frankly, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that we're getting a little bit lost in the weeds. I think structure and explicit instruction is important, but I do think that there's still a place for choice, for student voice, and for student interests to be, kept in mind. Like, for instance, when I was a classroom teacher, I had baskets of books that kids were deeply interested in. If we were working on animals, what's your favorite animal? Some kids chose the shark. Some kids chose the monkey. They became researchers and experts. Now, would I teach those same units way better now that I have training and explicit instruction? Absolutely. But I think that there's still a place for enjoying. Faith, would you agree? Tanya, would you agree?
Yes, I would definitely say that.
But I'm not seeing it, Faith. Not as much.
No. And I think that we've, this is the thing. We kind of go off in one direction. We go overboard and we miss out on certain things that really work. Tanya, I want to talk about the data in Australia. Let's go into some of the things that, you found and would like to share with us, and how this work maybe could move the needle a bit.
Yes, so we have just had the results of our national assessment data has been released. This is an assessment that every student in Australia sits. It tests year 3, 5, 7, and 9. So your child will sit this test every 2 years. The feedback that you receive as a parent is actually very, very good. So it will go through every maths component, every spelling example, and comprehension, reading, and grammar. So it will go through and say, yes, your child is able to add 2-digit numbers. No, they were unable to spell words that, ended in ACK, for example. So it's reasonably comprehensive. However, it definitely is a debatable topic, like most things are. Definitely within Australia, there are pros and cons of what we call our NAP plan. However, it is a data point. It's a measure of our results as a nation. The whole of Australia sits these tests on the same day. Okay. Now, our latest results showed that 52% of our year 9 or grade 9 boys, these are boys aged 14 to 15 years, are failing writing. Our writing component it actually includes the grammar and the punctuation as well. So it's actually taking those things into consideration. It's just not measuring whether a boy can respond to a stimulus picture. So it's a little bit more detailed than that. So this is a wake-up call for us as Australians. Boys are still lagging behind girls. We are throwing billions at our education system and we are not moving that needle. We are flatlining. So it's interesting that I'm talking to you ladies today and speaking with, your audiences from around the world, but it just gives you a snapshot of where we're sitting in Australia. What I fear is that these results are actually worse, because if you have students that are below testing ability, those children aren't even sitting the test. So schools, either direct them not to sit those tests. So I really fear that our statistics are actually worse than what's being revealed.
That happens here as well. So I hear what you're saying. So how have the schools, have they been receptive to your suggestions? Is it something that, they're using? Are they taking on some of your training? Like what's happening with that?
So here in Australia, we don't actually, we call it here our Department of Education, which is our government body. They leave it up to schools to make their individual choices with what programs they use. So it makes my job harder because you have to work school by school. And my growth comes from good results from one school. If they go to, a cluster meeting, then they can pass on that. It's easier to make inroads into what we call independent and Catholic schools here. They don't seem to be as probably constricted. It is very frustrating. I just know that parents are homeschooling has exploded here in Australia, and I don't blame a lot of parents. There's lots of reasons for that. That is not just the results I've shared with you. However, I think a lot of parents are also really frustrated with the school offerings. So we're definitely in a position here in Australia where things need to be better than what they are. And I'm just so passionate about this. I know we can make a difference. This is the thing. It's not something to despair about. I feel like we need to get these tools in front of teachers. I also need to mention that I would love our parents to do more at home. I think if I look at research, and you would find this the same, when I really dive into research about what happens with the interest in reading. So this is not reading ability. This is measuring whether kids enjoy reading. Scholastic did a large research article on this. It drops off after grade 4. Kindergarten, most kids will come back and say 100% they love reading. It drops down to 54% in about grade 4. And then from grade 4 to grade 8, it slips right down to 30%. By the time they're in grade 12, we're measuring in single digits the percentage of kids that enjoy reading. So I'd like to offer my theory around this. I'd love to hear what you think, and also your listeners and viewers. I think a part of this is by grade 4, most parents feel like their child has been taught the mechanics of reading and they can read. So from that point, nightly reading tends to drop off. We are competing with screens. Parents are working really hard. They don't have time to read. They're not reading in front of their students. And I don't mean phones. So reading on this is not the same as reading a book. So that drop off of actually kids witnessing an adult read, including their teachers. I think that, those early years you just read nightly because they had their reader coming home. But I'd love to hear what you ladies think. I think the actual interest in reading drops right off from grade 4. So I don't know whether you want to comment on that with what you've seen.
Judy?
Well, I have to be honest. So my own son, he used to take out 50 books from the library. He was an avid reader. And as he got older, probably around grade 4 or 5, it did start to look different. We have these discussions at home all the time. He's in the 99th percentile in literacy. He says reading just looks different now. He swears to me that he's reading. He's reading articles. He's writing articles. So I wonder if new research is going to come out, or if there already is research on, is reading on the internet having the same impact for kids? I mean, I don't know if he's reading novels, because now I don't see the physical novel. I used to see the Harry Potter. I used to see, the other books that he would read from his favorite authors. And now it's like I see him on a screen. So it's harder to monitor what your kid is reading. But in some ways, I think it still is reading. What do you, we might not prefer it, but I don't know if there's studies to say that that's not as good. I don't know. I'm reading on the phone all the time too. Faith, when you tell me to prepare, not tell me, you're not my boss, but when you tell me, when we discuss what we're reading next for the Literacy View, where am I reading it? On my cell phone. Today I was reading an article for one of the podcasts we're going to record. Faith, do you want me to tell you the truth? I was reading it while I was on the treadmill. I had an iPad out. I stuck it onto the treadmill. The instructor's saying, go elevate to 15. And I'm like standing there and I'm reading about music and literacy today. So I definitely think that we have lost a lot of our kids, but I think we have to accept the reality that reading might start looking a little different. And does that still qualify? What do you guys think?
So I just want to jump in and say, when you talk about 4th grade, grade 4, in this country years ago, they used to call that the 4th grade slump. When I was with Reading First, that was a big term. And what happened in 4th grade that makes kids kind of just start losing ground? Well, there are a number of reasons for this. The books are now not about topics that are in their zone. They're reading about things around the world. It requires more knowledge about the world to understand it. It requires endurance. A lot of kids have not built the muscle to be able to maintain their reading over long periods of time. It's like you have to train for that. As you said, yeah, when they're little, they need these short bursts, but eventually they really need to be able to practice to read lengthy texts, and they're not. If anything, the teachers now, from what I see, schools have, I hate, I'm going to use the expression, dumbed it down a bit, where it's, they make it so that, oh, you can't handle that. So now we're not requiring as much.
Or they're giving like these tiny excerpts. I'm seeing
Yes,
tiny
right.
excerpts.
So excerpts instead of.
I'm not seeing as many
novels.
book clubs.
Right.
You're right, Faith.
So,
You're right.
So it's the endurance. It's and then ultimately, I don't think they ever had strong literacy skills to start in the primary grades. And probably whatever they were able to get by with early on, the S hit the fan by the time they get to 3rd grade, and then certainly 4th grade. And, what maybe they were able to mask in the earlier grades, they weren't able to cover up anymore because they had these inherent problems that now reached the surface. So I think it's a number.
Faith, let me ask you, what do you think of kids reading on screens?
So look, I think that you said something before, Judy. It's our reality now. And so we're not going to change the world now. Screens are a part of the world. Do I think it had an impact? Yeah, I do. I think there's research showing that comprehension is not the same reading on a screen as compared to an actual book. But I do think that, well, then we have to try to help kids to be able to become better readers with the screen. I don't think we have to, throw our hands up and say, oh no, we have to get rid of it, because we're not. It's the same way we're not going to get rid of AI. We're not getting rid of screens.
I have to say something else controversial. So I recommended Faith read a book. I've been bothering her. I've been texting her all week to read this book about podcasting, because, we can't just read about literacy or listen to just literacy related stuff. And I'm listening to the book, and half the time it's so interesting and I'm obsessed with the book, but like a half hour later I'm like passed out in bed, and then I have to like listen to the chapter again. So not only are we having more kids read books on screens, now as adults and kids, a lot of us are listening on Audible as well. So it's like reading is changing. But even I myself, I'm going to be honest, I don't know if it's the best approach, because like when I used to read a book sitting near a pool and hold an old fashioned book or read my Cosmopolitan magazine, I was so invested. Yeah, you remember Cosmo, right, Faith? But now it's like I'm listening, then I'm falling asleep. And then I tell Faith, okay, I'm going to go listen to my book, but I need to drive when I listen to my book. I mean, how insane that I need to be multitasking and driving a car so I don't reach for something else and get distracted. So I think that there's definitely problems. Am I happy that I'm still reading? Yes. Do I think I'm as efficient as I can be? No. Do I think that everything Faith just said makes a lot of sense? Yes. The rigor is more intensive in the older grades, right? We place so much focus in K-2. Okay, break the code, break the code, break the code. But I got to bring it back to what was said at the Big Sky Literacy Summit, a reminder. We can't just wait till they break the code to bring in understanding. We can't just skip it. You have to make sure that you prioritize those language skills when they're little, starting at birth. Those kids are born, that's when literacy starts, right? And Tanya probably knows a lot about that.
That's
definitely. And Judy, can I mention, when you said about Audible before, I worked with one school, and this school spent thousands on Audible subscriptions for their boys. It didn't change anything. They just thought, if we purchase this, the boys will read, they'll listen. It didn't, because they didn't do anything with it. So I listen to all of their podcasts.
Why? What happened, Tanya? When you say it didn't happen, why?
Well, they could actually see the stats, Judy, behind about whether the boys were logging on and listening, and nothing was happening. So this school spent thousands thinking this would get their boys listening to books, at least interacting with reading via Audible, and it didn't work. So I just wanted to share that with you, because Audible, I think, is good if you can match it with the text and take a little bit of that hard work out of reading for boys. But it's, if you invest in something like that, what do you do with it? Just giving it to boys access is not going to assume reading. So I just wanted to share that with your listeners, that was just an experiment that didn't quite work.
So, Tanya, I wanted to ask you about boys and goals. So, I think that, at least from what I remember you saying, I'm trying to go back to your presentation in my mind. I think you talked about competition and boys enjoying some competition. How do you use that to your advantage to help with literacy?
So competition is an interesting concept. Boys do tend to enjoy competition as long as it doesn't become, antagonistic or negative in a negative way. What I like to foster is competition within themselves. Boys like an actual marker. So they like scores. They like, if they can actually, if you can combine them with watching their measurable score of improvement, with giving them control over that is very, very powerful. So whether that is teachers sharing growth data with boys, and it can be as simple as just saying, you've gone from 72% to 75%. That is brilliant, and you take those celebrations. So there's leaderboards. I know there's a lot of gamification that has value, but that doesn't hook every boy. So again, just planting that in their path doesn't necessarily mean that every boy will respond to that. I love opportunities where boys can take control of their own, their own scores and put in competition for themselves. And I find that a really valuable technique.
So, Judy, I think that's a very good point about kids being in charge of their own progress monitoring. When they're little, it could be difficult, but I know that when I had a fluency lab at a school, again, going back to my reading first days, I started a fluency lab, and we had the kids tracking their own progress and knowing their correct words per minute, not as a way to race or to speed read, but just as a way for them to keep track that, they were improving. Their fluency was improving. And it was a motivator, when they are able to actually mark it on their chart rather than somebody else doing it. It was something that I think absolutely helps. So I do agree with Tanya on that. Judy, I know you're into data as well. Are there ways to use data, scoring, self-competition, like being in competition with oneself? Are there ways to make this interesting for our boy population? What do you think?
So, it's interesting. I see a lot of celebrations in school for attendance. And sometimes I have very mixed feelings about that, because sometimes I feel like it's not fully in the realm of the control of the child. And sometimes kids get sick. I understand why schools, especially in poor districts, want to celebrate attendance. It is very important, and we need our kids to come to school. But I also think that it's important to celebrate academic achievement and effort. And I wish that both those pieces would be looked at more, because kids do have control of if they're trying, if they're making effort, if they're being persistent when something is hard. And I think that we do have to start celebrating those things more. I think myself, I'm a little inconsistent with celebrations sometimes. Sometimes at work, you get so busy with doing a million things and tracking the data. And very often I will provide teachers with feedback. Hey, your tracker looked really great. I noticed this. But I think that it's just as important to do that with children. And that brings me back to my classroom days. I used to do something, and I think I've spoken about it once before, something called Happy Notes. And when kids would do something that was academically pleasing or something, great, like you slid through a word at point of difficulty and you were able to go to code through that word today, you're going to get a happy note. You're going to go home with it. You're going to tell your parent about it. Your name's going to go back in the bucket. And on Friday, I'm going to pick out some happy notes with my magic wand. Yes, I like magic wands, Faith. I'm a little crazy. And we're going to celebrate. I think we need to celebrate students more. I think we give teachers so much negative feedback, and we need to change that systematically. Teachers, oh, you're a developing teacher. You're an ineffective teacher. And you know what those teachers do? They very often don't get better. They leave, they give up, they throw in the towel, or they decide to go be a waitress or teach in another town. And we need to give our kids more positive feedback. But I think the key with celebrations and feedback is giving specific feedback. The brain, all the research says, the brain likes to hear specific feedback. Why? If you're given specific feedback, you're going to want to do that same good behavior or strategy or method again.
I love to It's also it's beside data, but I think this is equally important. If you can have the little wins where you can ask them, a question about, I've been into classrooms where, you've got the year 8, year 9s, which they are tricky because you've got the teenagers, but in some ways they're actually better communicators than the smaller students. But what I have found huge wins for me is when they say, I just feel like I'm a better speller. It can be as simple as that. So in their mind, they may not be, at where they need to be with their peers, but if they feel within themselves, with actually a measure just within themselves, I feel like I, am a better speller. I had one boy say to me, I feel like I know how to use punctuation now from using your program. I went, that is amazing. I thought I'd go more of the data, Judy, thinking I was expecting him to say, I'm far better at comprehension now, or, I'm a much better reader. It wasn't that. He actually said, I feel like I know how to use full stops and question marks. And I went, that is such a win. It didn't actually need to be a score, but their assumption or their belief that they are better at something was just a wonderful confidence booster, small win, but I just thought, just take that as an absolute benefit of improving literacy.
So what do you think had that reaction? Like what was it about what you were doing that helped punctuation?
So I think with my early days and the mentors when I was a first teacher, and I'm in the same era, I've been teaching for say 28 years. I think I had all that wonderful mentoring about the core literacy skills. You have to practice spelling, grammar, and punctuation. So when I developed my program, I can see from our NAPLAN scores as well, we are measuring all of our Australian students on all those concepts: reading, writing, spelling, grammar, and punctuation. They actually get a score. They receive a score on all of those. And I thought, I remember being a teacher in the classroom and I would just photocopy a grammar worksheet once a week. It had no context. It was just, we're doing adverbs, and we'd all do it, and then I'd bring it in and I'd mark it. It was just, grammar was twice a week, a standalone worksheet. And I thought, if I want to make real impact, we have to get our students regularly practicing when to use speech marks, when to use, adjectives, the spelling rules, and you have to tie it together with the passage. So that's what I did. I took the topics such as skateboarding, and you put skateboarding, punctuation examples to do with skateboarding. You find a spelling rule from that, which might be OA words. So again, the boys are finding a connection between skateboarding and spelling. So that's with that just regular practice. Every topic goes through those 4 concepts every time they do, a section. I've worked with schools that are their year 11 and 12 students are doing extended literature. So they're choosing the high-end literature, these boys are. But guess what's pulling them down? At the end of the day, when they're sending their assessments to be marked by independent assessors, these boys are falling down on things such as punctuation. They don't know when to use the colon, the semicolon, correct use perhaps of commas. So these boys are really talented and choosing extended literature, but what's pulling them down is, the correct use of grammar. So that's why and punctuation, that was what was pulling down their scores. So that just was an interesting thing for me to witness, that all of these literacy concepts, they need to be practiced quite often, but make it fun, short, sharp, regular practice. That's what I'm all about. Not worksheets of punctuation, just doing it regularly, but making it fun and tied into something engaging.
So, that's interesting that you say that. I would say that that's a problem across the board with girls and boys. To be honest, I think a lot of kids are not taught how to use a colon, a semicolon, commas, that you'll see writing that just looks like, one long thought without being broken up, without
And
capitalization.
syntax is definitely neglected in classrooms as well.
Yeah. So I think that that's something that everyone needs to be aware of. But what's interesting with your focus on boys, I think I have a son as well. I have a daughter and a son.
And you have a grandson,
I
a
have a
little
grandson,
boy.
but he's, I can't tell anything right now with him, but I could say that my son always did love to read. He does not fit into that typical pattern of when people say, oh, boys would be, all over the place. He was, loved sports. He loved his music, but he also loved to read every night. So there are those kids that don't necessarily fit into this.
And my boys are not athletes.
So,
So
it's
all of my boys read too, but I think that perhaps innately the three of us, whether we consciously did it or not, we knew the value of reading. So I wish our parents of the younger generation really had a deep, deep understanding of their influence when they have these young people, boys and girls. The value of reading books is so far reaching. I'd love that messaging. I think our governments need to sort of help these younger generation of parents really communicate that our libraries are free. They are here. That's what our taxes pay for. But I wonder whether all of us have boys who read, but it probably came from us having an understanding of the value of reading and knowing that there'll be far-reaching consequences.
That's a very,
consequences.
very good point, Tanya. I did read to my kids every night, even during the hard days. I would come home from work, I'd be exhausted. Sometimes, I was overwhelmed. But the one thing that my now 23-year-old son tells me is, Mom, some of the most impactful moments from my childhood were when you and Dad used to read to us at night. And I will never forget that. So sometimes you think your kids don't appreciate or don't remember, but to hear that from a 23-year-old, that's valuable. But the problem is I work with some parents and maybe they can't read a book to a child, or maybe they can in a different language. I just think that we need to support our parents on what that looks like. And I think the biggest thing that I'm also learning in literacy is we can't assume. We can't assume that what one parent can do or one kid can do, that another kid, and to just give people, that coaching. I know Faith has a private practice, and one of the things that she talks about when she's working with families is, oh, Judy, those parents are with me. They know what I'm doing. They see what I'm doing. They're seeing how I'm doing it. And, the other night I had a parent that was at the table, and, it's much harder when I'm working with a student, but I keep reminding myself there's such a value, because now what I'm doing with the child, the parent will see that also. And there's that communication. I know Faith has always been a very big advocate for involving parents, and they're a key piece of it, and I think that instead of blaming our parents, we just have to educate our parents and maybe do more workshops. And I think the biggest thing is don't assume.
Yeah. And I would say definitely the other piece to this is, I think that we have to do more to get either the kids to the library or the library to the kids, because there are families where, a library could be far away. They don't have cars. We have some kids who come from very poor homes where transportation is an issue. Even just getting parents into a school and paying for a babysitter costs money. So again, what we would do is we would make sure to keep kids busy, bringing in activities so that teachers could have that time with parents, and they can know that their younger kids are being watched or being played with because they can't afford to leave them at home. And so we have to kind of be mindful, like Judy said. It's one, being able to model and show. Another thing is we have to do more to think about, well, what are the circumstances at home? Like Judy mentioned, maybe they don't read themselves, so it's hard. Maybe they know the value of it, but they're not equipped to do it. So we have to find ways around that. So Tanya, give us 3 things that you think are BS out there in literacy for boys, whether they're myths or something that you heard that you think would be complete BS. And then, 1 or 2 things you want to cheer about, or if you have 3, go for it.
Okay, only 3. All right. Number 1, I would say that boys don't read. I don't like that myth. Boys will read. They can read. We just need to work to really establish a positive relationship with text with boys. So that's probably one of my first myths. That boys really only like nonfiction. So I like to sort of challenge that a little bit. I feel that sometimes we have this leap where we've got our young gentlemen in years 3 and 4 that are reading some of those Diary of a Wimpy Kid books, which are all great. But then we have this bridge where we expect them in grade 9 to really do some in-depth novel studies. So, if we're not keeping track of their reading all that way through, I just feel like that's where we're losing boys too. They don't have that reading stamina. They don't have a positive relationship with books. So I really wish that we could just, along that bridge journey, that, all of us as a whole community, definitely a community, we have to make sure that our boys are reading all the way through. I don't like the myth that boys will always lag behind girls. I feel like that's something that our government's just, it's a bit of an assumption and an acceptance. And I don't agree with that. So I really want to push back on that. Our boys deserve better than that. And to be honest, literacy overarches everything. So the boys that are really good at maths or really good at sport, we have to make them understand that if you really still want to achieve a top grade in your PE, you have to, by high school, have a writing component to that. So that will contribute to your A. The boys who are good at maths, well, maths, guess what? It involves a lot of problem solving. So written problem solving demands, a comprehension domain. So I guess, the things I want to cheer about is when you have a boy who, when he can see his literacy skills improving, the confidence that follows is the best thing to witness in the world. I just love that. It really is setting them up on a path. The other thing I want to cheer about is to anybody who is listening, parents and educators who feel like year 8 or year 9 is too late. My son is always going to be achieving a C or a D. They're failing English. It's too hard. It's too late. It really isn't. It really, really isn't. So we just can't give up on these young men because they deserve a whole future. Their whole future is ahead of them. So whatever plan of work they do, whether that's, trades or, whatever business, if they want to own their own business, guess what? You need to be able to read contracts. So it's so valuable. I think the messaging around literacy is, it's so valuable. You will need it in your life. It's fundamental to success. So probably that's my lasting message, that literacy is the foundation for success, I believe, in life.
All right. So now I need to hold you accountable for 2 things. I need 2 practical tips for the classroom educators as we launch our school year. And then I want the last thing to be something a little bit more fun, your best memory in Oxford when we went to the World Literacy Summit. So 2 things, 2 practical tips, and then your best Oxford memory, and then that's a wrap.
For your teachers, I think if you can communicate to your students that you love reading, bring in a book, just have it subtly on your desk, share with the kids what you're reading, what you like about it. It's a bit more than a class library. I think now that we have to compete with screens, a classroom library sometimes is not really going to get our boys onto that. So leverage what's popular, leverage what their peers are reading. So there's research that shows that the biggest externality for students reading, I would have thought that us teachers were number one. Well, guess what? We're not. The biggest influence of a positive reaction to reading is their peers. The second one is parents, and teachers, we're third, but I still think we're super important. So if I could leverage, if classroom teachers could leverage the peers, what the peers are reading, that's important. Strong messaging to parents to value reading. And I think if your class see you as a reader, that's a very strong and powerful message that you can give them. Oxford, my tip was obviously meeting you two, and our husbands that all connected and had just such a great time. I just think that brought me a lot of joy. I loved meeting Jelly Roll. I really did. I was actually able to introduce him to the stage, and that was a complete fluke. I was meant to be introducing teenagers. They had it all wrong. And so I ended up introducing Sheriff
Yes,
Swanson
you were
and Jelly Roll.
introducing
So that
Jelly
is,
Roll.
oh my goodness, that is my highlight, because that is literally, I was fake it till you make it. I was that girl, like from Australia, on stage introducing Jelly Roll. I will never forget that. And my teenagers think I was pretty cool for doing that. So any
Do you
wins
have
in
a
that?
picture?
You are. You're very cool.
And beautiful. Do you have a picture of you after you introduced Jelly Roll?
I do, and he's coming here to Australia, and I would love to be able to get to his media team and say, do you remember me? I mean, he's such a mega star that I am like this important.
He's
but
invited on the Literacy View too. We're waiting for Sheriff Swanson to get back.
I know.
We had Sheriff Swanson on the Literacy View. That's coming out soon too. Tanya, we're going to want that picture with Jelly Roll so we could put
I
it
will
in-
send it. I will do that right after I get off our call today. But thank you for hosting this. I really love being a champion for our boys. They really are worth it. And the success stories that follow really just, keep me excited for what I do.
Thank you, Tanya. It was great seeing you again. And let's make sure boys get on board with books.
Definitely.
All right. That's a wrap. Good night, everyone.